Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're going to dive into two super important database strategies that are, frankly, game changers for scaling your .NET application. If you're building an app you hope will be successful, these are the techniques that will keep it lightning fast, even when you hit millions of users. So, let's jump right in. So let me ask you something. Does this sound familiar? You've built this awesome app. Users are starting to pour in, they love it, but things are starting to get kind of slow. Queries are taking forever, and the whole experience just feels sluggish. This is the classic growing pains of a successful application. And that right there is the scaling problem. It's a fantastic problem to have. It means you're growing. But it's a problem you have to solve and solve smartly before it starts frustrating your users. When you boil it all down, the issue is actually pretty simple. As your database grows and you've got a single table with millions or, hey, maybe even tens of millions of records, just asking it for some information becomes painfully slow. The database literally has to dig through a giant mountain of data for every single request. So how do we fix this? Well, our first weapon in this fight is called partitioning, and the strategy is a classic: divide and conquer. Instead of trying to search that entire data mountain all at once, we're going to break it into smaller, way more manageable hills. So what exactly is partitioning anyway? It's the process of taking one massive table and splitting it into these smaller pieces. And here's the really cool part. Your application has no idea. It still sees and talks to it like it's one single table. The database engine does all the heavy lifting behind the scenes. I love this analogy because it just makes so much sense. Picture a giant wedding cake. If every single guest had to come up and cut their own slice from the whole cake, you'd have a huge, slow, messy line. But if the cake is already pre-sliced, people can just walk up, grab their piece, and go. It's fast, it's efficient. Your database queries are those hungry guests. Now, there are basically two flavors of partitioning: vertical, which splits a table by its columns, and horizontal, also known as sharding. For our purposes, handling tons of users, we're all about horizontal partitioning. This is where you split the table by rows, usually based on something like a customer's region or the date a record was created. It is the way to go for scaling out. But wait, partitioning is awesome, but it only gets us halfway there. So if partitioning is all about splitting up the data, our next solution, read replicas, is all about splitting up the work. And a read replica is, well, it's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It's a copy of your main primary database. Its whole purpose in life is to do one thing and one thing only: handle read queries. All those select statements that are just fetching data for users to look at, they get sent to this copy. And we've got another killer analogy to help make this click. Think of a super busy restaurant kitchen. You have your head chef, that's your primary database, who's totally focused on cooking the meals, which are your data rights. Then you have a whole team of sous chefs. Those are your read replicas, and their job is just to plate the food and get it out to the customers. That's handling the reads. This setup frees up your head chef to just focus on cooking. So what do you get out of this? Well, the benefits are honestly huge. You dramatically cut down the load on your primary database, since it isn't juggling reads and writes anymore. This makes your whole system way more scalable, especially for read-heavy apps, and it also boosts reliability. It's a win-win-win. Okay, this all sounds cool in theory, but how do you actually do this in .NET? It's actually a lot more straightforward than you might think.
The big idea is just to point your database operations to the right place. So with something like Dapper, you might just use a different connection string for your read queries. With EF Core, a really common pattern is to set up a totally separate read-only database context that points to your replica. Simple, right? Writes go one way, reads go another. All right, we've got partitioning. We've got read replicas. Two amazing tools on their own. But now, for the really fun part, let's see what happens when we put them together to build something that can handle massive scale, like a social media app.
Let's just walk through a super common scenario. Okay, so a user opens your app to check their feed. That's a read operation. Your application is smart, so it sends that request over to a fast, dedicated read replica. Boom, the feed loads almost instantly. Then the user decides to post something new. That's a write operation. So that request goes straight to the primary database, which writes the new post into the correct partition, say the one for this month's posts. And this chart right here, it just lays it all out so clearly. The writes are handled efficiently by our main partitioned database, and the huge number of reads, those are spread out across all our replicas. And the result of all this? A massive boost in overall performance and a super snappy experience for your users. Okay, this all sounds fantastic, right? But, the devil's in the details. Getting the implementation right is absolutely crucial. So let's go over some of the keys to success. So let's quickly run through some best practices you've got to keep in mind. First up, your partition key is everything. Pick the wrong one and you'll get unbalanced hotspots. You've also got to be aware of replication lag, that tiny delay for data to show up on your replicas. You need a plan for what happens if a replica fails. And finally, monitor everything. Set up alerts so you know the second something isn't right. So, why go through all this trouble? Because this right here is the payoff. When you implement these strategies correctly, you're not just building an app for today. You're building an architecture that's ready to handle millions of users tomorrow, all while delivering that fast, responsive performance they expect. So, if there's just one thing you take away from all this, let it be this. Partitioning and read replicas aren't just fancy, abstract ideas. They are the real-world, practical backbone of any .NET application that's built for scale and reliability. And that brings me to my final question for you. Your app might be handling its current workload just fine, but take a second and ask yourself, is it really ready for the success that's just around the corner? Thanks so much for watching.